Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I'm going to be talking about Roger Corman's anarchic 1975 cult hit Death Race 2000. I actually picked this film to review more than 2 weeks ago, but it's become particularly apropos to look at it now because Corman actually just passed away at the grand age of 98 on May the 9th. So good timing, I guess, in some ways certainly appropriate to look at one of his movies now. And in the world of this film, a massive economic collapse afflicted the USA in 1979. 21 years later, the United States is an authoritarian state run on the principle of minority privilege, a massive legislatively mandated gap between the haves and the have nots. The latter group are kept quiet by a combination of false promises, bombastic jingoism, and televised blood sports. And the greatest of these blood sports is the Transcontinental Road Race, an annual 3 day event in which racers compete not just to be the first across the country, but also to accumulate points by intentionally running over any bystanders they might see. Over 75s of either gender, we are told, remain the biggest score at 100 points each. The five racers in this year's race include Matilda the Hun with her lovable Nazi navigator Herman, wise guy-esque machine gun Joe Turbo, played by a young newcomer named Sylvester Stallone, and the surgically reconstructed defending champion, the masked national hero known only as Frankenstein. Now, unknown to the authorities or the racers, however, a grassroots democratic resistance movement plans to disrupt this year's events and put an end to the barbaric race forever. They've infiltrated one of their number into the race as Frankenstein's navigator. They intend to kidnap him and hold him hostage until the race is abolished. Frankenstein, for his part, has his own agenda, one that means he'll stop at nothing to win the race. The results are bound to be explosive for all concerned. This film came about for the most Roger Corman of reasons. He wanted to make a science fiction sports film to cash in on the publicity surrounding Rollerball. It was to prove a difficult production. The first script was judged unfilmable and rewritten by frequent Corman collaborator Charles B. Griffin. Then preferred star Peter Fonda turned down the film for being too ridiculous, to which I can only say, Sir, you made Idaho Transfer. In any case, they finally got David Carradine to sign on. He was eager for a role that would distance him from the Kung Fu TV show, but then they probably ran into shooting delays because his TV schedule for that show meant that he wasn't available, and then bad weather also afflicted the production. And then, even once the footage was in the can, the struggles weren't over. Director Paul Bartel clashed with Corman over the tone of the movie. Bartel said, Roger and I had an essential disagreement over comedy. He took out a lot of the comedy scenes. Most of my guilty pleasures in this film were ripped out by the roots by Roger Corman before the film ever saw the light of day and substituted with crushed heads and blood squids. But then Bartel also added, Corman may have been right and was probably more objective. Now, obviously, I have not and can't ever see the film as Bartel intended to be, but I suspect his final admission was on the money. I love this gonzo, anarchic, hyper-violent gallows humor thrill ride of a movie. And I'm now going to talk about why, while at the same time trying not to spoil anything, because really this is a film that deserves to be experienced in an unspoiled a case as possible. So let's start with a frank acknowledgement. Roger Corman made movies not to make art, but to make money. Whether a film was good mattered much less to him than whether he could make a profit from it. Much of his output is therefore minimum level effort stuff, in the sense of I'm doing just enough that this should make money. But Corman was also a man with an eye for talent. Many big name stars and directors of the 80s and 90s got their start in his films in earlier decades. And from time to time, his sheer volume of output led to a diamond in the rough. And this film, in my opinion, may be the biggest gem of them all. If you're going to watch only one Roger Corman film in your life, Death Race 2000 is the one I would recommend. It's right in the middle of the best, most dynamic decade of Corman's career, and it definitely combines his willingness to tap into counterculture and anti-establishment themes with his pragmatic eye for what puts butts in seats: sex and violence. The end result is an experience as wild and anarchic as the race it depicts that will more than once leave you saying, did they really just go there? And the answer is yes. Yes, they did just go there. And to my mind, the movie's greatest strength is not only that it has the courage to be wild and anarchic and cuttingly satirical, and to go to strange places that those elements lead, but it also has the courage to just be. Many works of media succumb to the temptation to wink at the audience. Yes, this is very silly and over the top, they slyly acknowledge, but don't worry, we're too smart to really mean it. We know we're being silly. They want to have it both ways. They want to be wild and crazy, but also clever and cool, and they often end up undercutting themselves from being either. Death Race 2000 has no such inhibitions. Like the 1980 version of Flash Gordon, which is another movie I adore, it commits 100% to its own reality, putting the gonzo accelerator to the floor and never ever pumping the brakes to reassure the audience, not to worry, this is all satire. And that's the single most important thematic choice of the film. And I suspect that we have Roger Corman's chuck out some of the jokes and put in more sex and violence instead decisions to thank for it. A more consciously jokey version of the film would, I think, have lost its edge. So, good work, Mr. Corman. Now, success, of course, often breeds imitation, and since Death Race 2000 grossed roughly 15 to 20 times its own budget, those imitators have been many. And since some of those imitations came from Universal Pictures, who own the rights to this movie, as well as from Roger Corman himself, there are multiple other films bearing the Death Race title. So if you do go looking for this movie, be very, very careful to get Death Race 2000. Not just a movie called just Death Race, or Death Race 2, or Death Race 2050. None of these offerings are a patch on the original. Those without a year number lack the social satire and are just straight up car race action films, a niche that the Fast and the Furious movies have filled with far better success, in my opinion. Corman's own Death Race 2050, meanwhile, lacks the edge of the original. There are two big problems with that film, to my mind. The first is it treads the title both sides canard, and the second is it succumbs to the very temptation the original so cleverly avoided, acknowledging the craziness of its own premise and characters and undermining both in the process rather. So you can skip the remakes and the sequels, but in my opinion, you should absolutely see Death Race 2000, preferably with friends, because this is a great movie experience to share. Next time, I did not used to be a spy, but Michael Weston did until he got burned. When you're burned, you've got nothing. No cash, no credit, no job history. You're stuck in whatever city they decide to dump you in. It's Burn Notice, which ran for 7 seasons between 2007 and 2013. But that is for next time. Until then, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've seen Death Race 2000, let me know why you loved it, because you'd better have. Okay, thanks for watching.